What it do, what the business is, it's yours truly, LT the Don Juan. We back at it once again. Today we picking off where we left off at, and we're talking about the number 23. It's a movie with Jim Carrey, and we're also trying to incorporate the Truman Show and get a narrative and see if we can see different observation of what we're looking at with a spiritual eye, if you will. We're gonna speak on these terms and these movies biblically speaking, and see if Jim Carrey is conveying some form of art that speaks to a more deeper tone or reality, right? Anyway, so last time we talked about quantum physics. We talked about superposition. We talked about quantum mechanics, right? We talked about all of these different interesting things that are definitely probably outside of our pay grade. However, those things are I think they're necessities and or tools when it comes to talking about seeking God or just understanding why we're here in this world to begin with. So today we're gonna continue breaking down these characters in the number 23 and the Truman Show, and see if we can get some aspect of Christ in these things, right? So a lot of times I've showed you the 6 and 7 aspect between the man and the woman, right? So the characters in this movie, I want to say there are 7 men, and there are actually 7 women this time. Now, there are actually probably, I want to say, 8 men if I include the father who was in the cemetery with Walter and Barnaby. Now, we already broke down Walter's name and his family, right? So we know they kind of represent the Trinity aspect of biblical context, right? Agatha being like the guardian or the cloak or the protection, right? We broke that down in Greek mythology through Almathea or the Aegis cloak, right? Also, we showed you that throughout the expressions of her character throughout the movie. Also, we showed you Walter being the leader of armies, if you will, right? Having this kind of Michael aspect or Christ-like aspect as well, depending on what vantage of the movie we're looking from. Also, we know that they have a son, right? Because usually in this Trinity, this divine feminine, usually that is cast into the material world, if you will, her usually male member is significant or signified through the birth of her male child, not because she herself is literally some androgynistic character. She does have both divine masculine and feminine spiritual mindset, if you will, or that 0 and 1 aspect, if you will. But she also, because of her choices, the male child usually is going to be the first outcome of that transgression, if you will. It's usually going to be a male child. It's hardly ever do you see that the girl is born first, except for in the story of Apollo and Artemis, which that was a particular reason for that, because he was still in the womb for 9 days. Anyway, so we know that the family represents the Trinity. We have Walter, we have Agatha, and then we have the son, Robin. We know that Walter, in a sense, represents the sun. We know that Agatha, in a sense, represents the moon. And we know, in a sense, that the sun represents the third eye, if you will, in this sequence. And his name also is Robin, if you will. Like a red robin, you know. Symbolic of Christ, in a sense, if you will. Obviously, there's going to be many different aspects of Christ here. So we have Walter Paul Sparrow, right? We have Agatha Sparrow, and then we have Robin Sparrow, right? Sparrow, symbolic of not only the bird, the sparrow, but God's eye being upon the sparrow, if you will. And you might see that sparrow pop up in many different aspects on different films and features of a kind, right? Having a symbolic message to it. The second character that we're going to point out, I believe this is Walter's therapist, which is Sirius Leary. Now, Sirius Leary, right? Sirius itself represents the dog star. Now we know the dog star is symbolic of a, I guess, alien race, if you will, called the Dagon or the Dogon, right? We know that the Dagon are symbolic of the Bible as these men with fish attributes, right? Fish bodies, if you will, fish heads, but they have faces of men and bodies of men also, very distinctly so. Um, so the dog star is symbolic of Christ in some way, shape, form, or fashion, right? We know this is Canis Major, if you will. Now, Sirius' last name is Leary, so Leary means to be cautious and or suspicious. We know when we talk about the serpent, right, or the serpent seed, if you will, the enmity between that seed and the woman seed spoke of in the book of Genesis, we know that there is a serpent seed, right? So, in saying that, we know that there are two different seeming races, if you will, or species, maybe even, if you will, right? You have this serpent-like species, and you have this woman-like humane species, right? Now, continuing on. So, we know in the Bible that the serpent was the most cautious, right? He was the most suspicious, or it was the most suspicious, right, creature in the Bible, right? Therefore, given an attribute of being wise, right? The serpent was considered wise, right? And the angels were given some sense of a serpent-like aspect as well when we talk about the seraphim. The seraphim stands for fiery serpent, which is a form of an angel, if you will, right? But continuing on, so we have Sirius Leary, right? Cautious and suspicious, representing this Dagon-like, serpent-like, fish-like characters from a particular star system, right? But continuing on, the next character we already spoke on in our last video is Barnaby, which is he's going to be formed together with the dog, since he's the keeper of the garden, and the dog Ned. So Barnaby and the dog are going to kind of be like one and the same. And we know that all of these male characters in some way divide into Jim Carrey's multiple aspects of breaking down God and or Christ or superposition. But continuing on. But today we just breaking down the characters, and then we also want to break down the numbers and see in any of these frames of this movie, do these numbers really give a detail of a certain kind of God and his wife, or him having to sacrifice himself, or any of these type of details that are necessary to get some aspect of a physical, spiritual observation, right? But continuing on. So we know that Ned is the defender, right? He's the guardian, if you will, aka Alex, if you will. We talked about the many variations of that. But we know that Barnaby, we spoke of him also just from the first video, right? Because Barnaby is a variant of Bam. And we know about Saint Barnaby and or Saint Barnabas. Now, one thing I found interesting when looking into Barnaby is there is a scripture or a book called the Epistles of Barnaby. Now, we all know that there were many books that were not included into the Bible overall, but I think in a generation where information is key, especially to somebody like me and or people that are, searching to find the truth in life, I think information is always key. So Barnaby in this movie from 2007 finds himself this name, which is, all of these names are common. I get it, and et cetera, et cetera. But we're just looking from a prospect of having a spiritual eye. And this is for entertainment purposes. I mean, we're learning something in the 21st century that we didn't have these type of tools or capacities, and to whatever magnitude or degree that we had them, trust and believe me, it's a lot easier now than it was then. But we have Barnaby, Saint Barnaby, the saint of storms and hail storms, right? And we have Ned the dog, right? We talked about Hermanubis, the dog god, if you will. We talked about the combination between the Greek god Hermes and the Greek god Anubis, because One is like the messenger god. The other one is the carrier from one life to the next life, if you will, right? So those combinations are very symbolic when we talk about what time that we may be walking into right now. But continuing on, we know the next character is the Christ-like detective character in the book, right? The homunculus, if you will, right? The created being, if you will, right? Brought into the physical world, right? And we use the homunculus as a kind of allegory and a metaphor. I'm not exactly saying that's exactly how they formed Christ and brought him into being, but we can use that analogy to understand that these little details will be present so that you can see those different things. Now, when we talk about the Dogon or the Dagon, you may hear one of the terms of these beings called the gnome or the Numu, right? That's just another word for a gnome, right? A gnome or a homunculus, right? So they're going to have all these AKA formats of trying to sugarcoat everything, but a gnome or a Numu is a gnome. A gnome is a homunculus. A homunculus is, and all of these different things are associated all the way back to the Dagon or the Dogon, if you will, right?
But King Hammurabi was documenting exactly what happened. He was advised by an extraterrestrial.
Ancient astronaut theorists suggest that not only were the Babylonian gods extraterrestrials who instructed King Hammurabi, but that one of them provides an intriguing connection to the Dogon of Africa and their amphibious visitors from Sirius B. That god, the chief god of the Babylonians, was called Dagon.
They have a god named Dagon, and it too is an amphibious human god.
The Babylonian god Dagon sounds eerily similar to the Dogon tribe, who claim they were visited by beings from Sirius B. Is that because the Dogon named themselves after the same god?
All the reported extraterrestrials. Part 25. The Nommo. Could ancient myths about aquatic beings actually be evidence of alien contact? Meet the Nommo, legendary fish-like creatures said to have come from the stars. The Nommo come from the ancient stories of the Dogon people of Mali, West Africa. According to their oral traditions, these amphibious beings descended to Earth from the Sirius star system thousands of years ago. The Dogon described the Nommo as part human, part fish, with shimmering scaly bodies and the ability to live both in water and on land. The Nommo are said to have brought wisdom, advanced knowledge of astronomy, and even helped humanity develop civilization. What's fascinating is that the Dogon's knowledge of the Sirius star system, including details about Sirius B, a white dwarf star invisible to the naked eye, was only confirmed by modern science in the 20th century. Some believe this knowledge could be linked to the Nommo's teachings. Skeptics argue it's all myth, but could these ancient stories hint at a forgotten chapter of alien contact? What do you think? Myth or evidence of extraterrestrials guiding humanity? Drop your thoughts below.
Africa, 1931. French anthropologist Marcel Griaule treks through the forbidding desert in search of the mysterious Dogon tribe. As Griaule starts collecting Dogon legends, he notices an eerie similarity to ancient tales found across the globe. Tales of amphibious gods, in this case called Nommo, who came from the sky, lived in the sea, and helped mankind. According to the Dogon, their gods didn't come from Sirius A, a star that is clearly visible in the evening sky, but from its tiny companion, a dying star called Sirius B, that can only be seen with advanced, high-powered telescopes.
The Dogon knew about the invisible companion star to Sirius. How did they know?
If you look into the Dogon, you know, we've been talking a lot about symbolism and things like that, I believe you will see a different aspect of a creature that they wear on their head, and it's always got a certain Ka symbolism in the form of a man. Kind of look like a pixel stick figure, dumbed down version of the Vitruvian Man or something like that. But you'll often see people in Africa and different places like that imitate these histories. They always have this symbolism of a certain character. Now, I've seen that character on a medallion before, and I'm going to show you that medallion and that character, and for some reason, there's an association there. And I want y'all to tell me what y'all think about it. Entertainment purposes only, right? But it's interesting that all of these things go together, right? So we know that Detective Fingerling is he's the angel, or he's the Christ-like figure investigating crime, right? We know that the main character in this whole aspect of the movie is Laura Tollins, right? We know that she was born on February 10th, 1968. She died on February 10th, 1991. We know that the movie ended on February 10th, 2007, speaking. Y'all gotta do look. This is interesting, and this is for entertainment purposes, and we just gonna keep the narrative going, right? Y'all do the 2 and 2 and no. I'm just telling you, you do the 2 and 2. I'm gonna deliver the information, but continuing on. So we also have Robin Sparrow, the son, right? The third eye, if you will. He is the bridge between the husband and wife. You know, when the husband and the wife get married, they become one. But what makes them one is they're half and half, right? That genetic factor between the two of them becoming actually one. So the child is the bridge, if you will, right? The child will be the bridge between the mother and the father within that superposition, if you will, right? Within the system of the superposition, right? But we know that the superposition must collapse, because in order for us to have come into being, that's what had to happen. I mean, physical being and the physical aspects of this world and where we live. In order for us to come into being, being in superposition had to collapse, because being in superposition would have kept everybody probably protected and or safe. But staying in superposition would have been like staying in a dream state forever, right? You know, like there'd be some sense of awareness of self, and but you'd be always within Christ, or you would always be within God. And since you had not been formed yet, physically speaking, that wouldn't have been probably the type of fun that it could be now, since we actually exist or have existed at all in time and space, right? So continuing on. Next we have Dr. Miles Phoenix. We know that Miles Phoenix was like a professor in the book, but he also represented like this dual character also, right? Because in real life, the character was Kyle Flinch, which would be number 7. But Dr. Miles Phoenix is symbolic of Fingerling, I guess, if you will, since he's the character within the number 23, the book. He's going to represent his falling and or rebirth. Now, when you look at the movie, there were several fallings, if you will. We had Suicide Blonde, who was jumped from a building. We had Jim Carrey when he was staying at King Edward's Hotel, right, out of a building, right? And then we also had Mr. Miles Phoenix. Even though it was like him imagining him throwing him out of a building, it was still symbolic to these falls, if you will, into the material or into this world, right? So they show you that. Now we know Miles Phoenix, we know that the phoenix bird represents a cycle of life, death, and rebirth, if you will, right? Out of the ashes rises the phoenix, if you will, which is symbolic of Christ going from his crucifixion to his 3 days in the burial and to his resurrected state. And all of those different states of him going to and from and out of would cause him to go through what we would say some sense of therapy, if you will, right? We know that he was anointed before he was crucified, and he was also anointed afterwards in a sense of burial preparation rites, right? But continuing on. So you have that representation of this Phoenix character through Dr. Miles Phoenix, right? We also have Kyle Flinch, which was supposed to be like a friend. But, all of these friends, if you will, symbolically, metaphorically, in some shape, form, or fashion, were sleeping with the character in the book named Fabrizia, who is like kind of AKA like Eve in a way, She's kind of also like, obviously, these multiple facets of the divine feminine, if you will. So you're going to see her seem like these devil-like characters, right? Because she likes all of these kinky, dark things, right? Just is what it is. If you pay attention, you can see that in the movie. Dark everything, dark everything, dark everything. Especially within the symbolism, if you will, right? Because we're talking about dark matter. She's the dark mother, if you will. And we're not talking about dark in the sense of like it's just bad, but you got to understand that in creation, there is life and death, but continuing on. So they just express that to you very thoroughly in the movie. There's one point where Jim Carrey walks up and he keeps having these reoccurring dreams that he's practically sacrificing her in a way. And you see these same elements played out in The Night of the Comet with Samantha. And we know that Sam, right, is just AKA for Lucifer. So we know that she's playing these multi-facets of the divine feminine. And I'll show you that. Anytime you see this happening where they're sacrificing her, that is just her becoming pregnant in the spirit, if you will. Because we already know there's going to be some sense of her seeming like she's portraying God in some type of way. But we know if God knew everything that was going to happen, then we must understand that God knew that she was going to want to have children, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And since he understands the law of nature, she was going to be the one to give birth, right? The mother of all, if you will. But continuing on. So next we have the father, right? The father of the garden. So we have Walter, Sirius Leary, Barnaby, Ned the dog, right? Fingerling. We have Robin, Dr. Miles Phoenix, and we also have Kyle Flinch. And we have number 8, the father, if you will, right? Now, one of the main things that stood out to me, because I broke down to you guys how Jim Carrey or Walter and Laura had this dual aspect. So we have to point out those things so that we can see how they are kind of like one and the same, if you will. Okay, so we know that Dr. Miles Phoenix represents the death and the rebirth, if you will, or the resurrected Christ, if you will, right? The miles representing the abyss, right, where Christ had to go, symbolic of the harrowing of hell, if you will, right? But continuing on. Now, if we look at the main character who was sentenced for the crime of Walter, right, practically committing suicide. That's why you kept seeing the fall, because him murdering Laura in some sense was himself, right? We talked about the divine wisdom and Christ coming down as wisdom, yada, 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 so on and forth, and how she was the reason for leaving superposition. So that's the reason God had to create a begotten son, because he already knew that these betrayals seemingly was going to happen, but they were all by his own doing, Therefore, even though Christ was innocent, it's kind of like in a way he was guilty too. It's like, because, well, I knew she was going to portray superposition so that everybody could have an opportunity to have life. And then, not only that, he already knew he was going to have to create a son that he was going to have to put himself inside, all of his spirit practically, to sacrifice and bond the bridge between life and death and eternity and all of these different things like that. So, you know, he already understood the portrayal that even he was committing unto himself in some type of way, you know. But continuing on. So that is symbolized through Kyle Flinch, right? Now, Kyle is the one who walked in the room and wanted to be stupid and pick up the knife. He is also the one that probably caused the jealous rage in some sense, because Laura was having an affair with Kyle Flinch, actually, right? So continuing on. Now, don't get too confused about that, because all of these characters are just multiple aspects of some fight between 0 and 1, if you want to look at it that way, right? But continuing on, right? And sometimes these zeros and ones are in superposition. So if one is seem like the other, or the other seem like the one, that's because of the superposition. All right, but continuing on. And remember, in order to collapse superposition, one got to come out of it, if you will. One has to come down. One has to come out, if you will. And I'm going to show you multiple aspects of superposition and every culture that I can pull out of a rabbit's hat here real quick pretty soon. But yeah, one. Come out of the superposition to measure, if you will, time, space, existence of everything that is, so on and so forth, right? So since superposition had to collapse, so did everything else as far as coming into being. That was the whole purpose that she left superposition. For the tree's sake, for the grass sake, for the dirt sake, for the bird's sake, for the grasshopper's sake, for the turtle's sake, and for our sake as well. Now, Father already knew that was going to happen, but since she is the matriarch, in the sense that she is the mother, she is the matter of it all. You know, it's like dark matter, antimatter. You know what I'm saying? Antimatter, dark matter, if you will, right? If you look at it like that. One is immaterial, the other is material, right? In some way, shape, form, or fashion, and all things emanate or come into being from that. But continuing on. So Kyle means straight and narrow, right? See, this path chosen is the road less chosen. It's the road less taken. It's the road less traveled, right? See, everybody else kind of, we're not going to talk about how they do, but placate those things, right, in art form. But either way it go, that's the nature of the beast, if you will. It's to placate to you the truth in ways that, if you do observe these truths, you're not observing these truths in a way that you're ever going to just be plain. And if you are plain about those truths, and your influence is overly impactful, unless they done changed the way they do things nowadays, which I know they probably haven't, it's kind of obvious. Yeah, you're gonna be stuck not telling it like it is, just simple and plain. But continuing on. So we got Kyle, meaning narrow and straight, because narrow is the path, right? That leads to heaven. It says a highway to hell and a stairway to heaven, right? Highway to hell and a stairway to heaven. That means one of them take a little bit more time to get there. And one of those ways has easy access, right? But continuing on. So, flinch means involuntary pain or anticipation. Kyle Flinch, the straight and narrow, and flinch meaning involuntary pain or anticipation. Because when you think about him, if he's Christ also, right, he's innocent, he's being falsely imprisoned, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you know, I mean, that's one of those heavy burdens that he had to bear. He knew that creation and the existence of all that is was because of his own doing, and that he had to create himself in the form of a man to come die about these things, for the simple fact that she wanted the opportunity for everybody to live. You know, was it her fault? No, he already knew these things, so that's why he created himself and his son. But continuing on, so it was involuntary pain or anticipation to get crucified. Like, you know, like, man, I know she gonna do this. I'm gonna have to have a son, have to put my spirit in him, and then I'm gonna have to endure and watch these incursions happen, and he gonna be like Eli Sabaki Thani, and you know, all of these things like that, and it's gonna be a lot going on, right? Now,
For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood, shed on the cross. Once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior. But now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation.
John chapter 3, verse 34 reads, "The one whom God has sent to represent him will speak the words of God, for God has poured out upon him the fullness of the Holy Spirit without limitation."
Now, because of that, that's a burden to bear. He was guilty, but he wasn't guilty. You understand that? It's like he guilty, but in the flesh, you are aspect seemingly of the Son. So the Son was and was not, if you will. It was his cup to bear. But continuing on. So, what are one of the first aspects of these sacrifices? We know that when Walter, right, committed the act of murder, that he buried Laura's body under the steps of heaven, right? So, we have a date under the steps of heaven, which is June 9th, 1931, which is, I'm going to assume, when the park was established, which was Casanova Park speakingly, right? And we know that this Casanova character, I mean, think about Zeus in Greek mythology speakingly. You know, the enmity between him and his wife was his many relationships with all of these different women throughout Greek mythology. Now, if we look at this as in an aspect of man coming out of superposition into the physical realm, we know that these so-called deities had certain garments that they wore. These garments can be expressed through other stories, but I know that that story is definitely for a later date and time, right? The maker of these things, if you will, right? It's the maker of these things, which is really the detail of these stories, but we're going to get into all of that some other time. But we know that in order to come out of the superposition into a collapsed state of this physical state of this realm, in order for them to still be in wherewithal state of who they are and be able to break the bounds of those things and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they were wearing the Aegis. And that's just as simple as that. What is one of the other ones called? The golden fleece? Yeah, the golden fleece, right? Remember the golden sheep that was protected and guarded by Apollo, I believe? Yeah, all of these stories have so many metaphors, allegories, and or details that are necessity or necessary for you to know when we talk about the future and if you ever going to be a part of it. Some people gonna think transhumanism. Some people gonna understand what is the truth, right? Go watch Angels and Demons, man. Angels and Demons, that movie with Tom Hanks, was simply because the character playing on that movie, the one that worked at the CERN particle accelerator, right, from the Vatican, he was one of the bishops or whatever have you. He discovered in his mind that science and religion go together. Well, I'm going to need people in their time and day, in this lifetime where we living in such quite a time to be alive, to figure out what any of that actually means. Biblically speaking, or whatever aspect of life that you perceive these things. So we have Kyle Flinch, who was falsely in prison, right? Another form of Jim Carrey in a way, shape, form, and or fashion, right? involuntary pain anticipation, right? Crucifixion, if you will, right? Now, those are all the men in the group. Now, the steps to heaven is where Laura Tollins, February 10th, right, was buried. So, what does June 9th express to us? Well, we know June represents Juno. That is the goddess of fertility and birth, right? So, we automatically have this mother-bearing figure of this divine child aspect right here in the name June. And then we also have the number 9, which signifies 9 months of giving birth, or the letter Nun, right? Which is the snake basket, if you will, which means she is guarding and protecting something, which is the child within the womb, if you will, right? Continuing on. And all of these symbolisms go all the way back to Moses and so on and so forth. But we have June 9th, 1931. So we have Juno. What does the number 9 tell us? Something lost in a meadow, right? That's in the Greek and Hebrew. Now, just like Moses was placed into this metaphor of a snake basket, into this ark, if you will, right? He was floated over into a stream, into a reed, right? Like the meadows, into a plush garden, if you will, where the Pharaoh's daughter found him, right? Now, 1931, it means to go down, the same. Remember, I said that they are the same. Laura Tollins is symbolic of Walter in some way, shape, form, or fashion. He had to even bury the body himself, and only he knew where it was. They even put up a tomb and a marker and a tombstone for Laura Tollins, but there was no body in the tomb, if you will, right? Because only Walter, who is Laura, knew where the body was, right? Continuing on. Now, you have 1931 meaning same, right? Because there's that dual aspect there. He's burying the sin of the world in himself, in wisdom, if you will, right? He's burying what wisdom did, but he's doing it, if you will, right? That's why it had to symbolize her in some way, even though it was him. Same, 1931. Set to go down. Where? Into the grave, right? Christ had to go down into the grave for the sins that was committed through the acts of her wanting to step outside of superposition. Inside superposition, yeah, they know what's real, but they're only the aspect of what's real. They're experiencing everything and what everything could be, right? They're experiencing everything and everything that was, is, and yet to be, right? That's what superposition was able to do as that bond in marriage between the two, between the 1 and the 0, right? The 2, 1, and the 0, right? But continuing on. Now, that bond was broken because of her. Now, because of that, Christ had to come into being. And that is expressed even him being crucified on the cross. But that's a whole nother story, right? So, I thought that stood out first and foremost. Now, number 23, since that's the whole number 23, since that's the whole name of the movie, right? The number 23 in the Greek and Hebrew means indignant and to be greatly displeased, right? And it says, my Father has gathered. So we know that there is a time where God is fed up, where God is indignant. I remember when I first started understanding things 11 years ago, which is a small span of time to God. I said that God was pissed off. You know, I said that God is angry. You know, but when you go to the Bible and try to find out where can you find this character of God at, it's all over the Old Testament. And it's anywhere that you can find that God has been indignant. See, Christ didn't come to bring that into the world, so y'all don't understand that the sacrifice was necessary. Now, the second arrival of this whole circumstance, I'm telling y'all, we're going to keep playing a game of distracting you into oblivion, because why? I do not know. I don't know how. I do know, Because the rich man, even in the pit of hell, because God wasn't even going to be able to send him back to convince nothing. So I get that. You know, I understand that anybody could come from something unbelievable, and those unbelievable terms and or circumstances are not merited to be warranted in this reality. And that's okay. You know, but I find it unique that we can be desensitized to so much and still don't see through nothing. And then we think we're seeing through everything else. Like, that's interesting right there. But continuing on. So the number 23 itself, right? Because God had to bring into material form human beings. I know we wonder why Earth is so important in the small spectrum of the universe, right? But you know Christ was born here in this world. And if that's the truth in any way, shape, form, and fashion, then in a way, shape, form, and fashion, God is from Earth. And if God is from Earth, the maker of all things, I mean the heavens, the earth, the universe, and everything in it, created a system, came out of superposition, right? So that all of these things could be. Knowing his wife was going to not want to stay in superposition, she wanted to give birth to material. See, I can't even, boy, I'm telling you, because it's that wild when you think about it for real. But we have to start understanding these things at some point, because you living in a generation where God made it available to you. It ain't about your perfection. Be beautiful, be bold, be brave, be happy, you know, be outspoken, be underspoken. Stay out the way, you know, do whatever you feel like you need to do in this life to maintain. But I'm giving you a recipe that maybe ain't for everybody to decipher or to decode. But at the same time, the information is present. Now, we're continuing on down the bread trail. The next numbers I want to point out in this movie is the King Edward's Hotel, right? We know that King Edward's is symbolic of Westminster Abbey and the royal family, if you will, and where King David's throne is. Now, we're talking about in the sense of Judah. Now, we know that Ephraim is symbolic of that family, if you will, right? But we're not talking about Ephraim. We're talking about Judah in this particular aspect. But King Edward's Hotel gave us a phone number, 555-1232. We've seen 555 before. When it's dealing with Hollywood, you're always going to see 555, right? But we've seen that on Night of the Comet, 555-4487, if you will, right? But continuing on. So 1232 means to distinguish and to discern, right? What are we trying to discern, right? Hold on. So, King Edward's Hotel, the phone number being 1232, right? 555-1232. So we know 1232 means to distinguish, to discern. It also means proved of Yah. So what are we distinguishing and or discerning? We need to distinguish and discern what it is that is proved of God. It says, study yourself and find yourselves approved, right? How do you study and find yourself approved? Not only do you learn what the word means, you understand its multifacets and its multi-dimensions. You also take that into this observable world, because you do not have the measurability of this world just so you can look at it, right? We talked about Romans chapter 1 already, right? And the invisible capabilities, capacities, and or observations and the physical things that God made, right? So, to distinguish and discern what is proved of Yah, right? Because we know God is indignant, right? Greatly displeased, right? And because of this reason, at some point, my Father has gathered or has to gather. My Father is a gatherer, if you will. I believe it also says something else in acquisition to that. 23 Strongs. A.B. Asaph, my father has gathered. The gatherer, right? So we know in the time of God's indignation, he wants to gather back his people. That's the whole point of me keep on bringing up Jeremiah 29:11. Now, all things in the Old Testament have been fulfilled, but at the same time, you guys have to understand the repetitions of cycles and how these are dimensional plays that continue to reenact themselves. That's why you can see Babylon in the Old Testament and Mystery Babylon in the New Testament, right? And so on and so forth. But continuing on, these things are repetitions until these things cycle out to the so-called end of time, if you will. These things will continue to happen. That's why Jim Carrey made a comment talking about time is just numbers with meanings attached to them, practically. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, he's sensing that time has some sense of an illusion, if you will. Now, we know that when it comes to time, we can have an observation there of superposition when it comes to Saturn and or Kronos, if you will, in mythology. You know, he swallowed the whole of his kids, and he thought that he swallowed Zeus also, but, you know, he swallowed a rock in place of Zeus, right? Now, that's just the observation of superposition. Now, when Zeus goes to take Kronos out the way to help his brothers and sisters come up out of Kronos, or Saturn, if you will, that was the collapsing, if you will, of superposition. So you can continue to see these plays of superposition and coming out or collapsing superposition through mythology. They just sugarcoat it pretty good. But continuing on, right? So we know that there is a time of gathering, if you will. It says 555 to have strength and courage, right? Because a stripping off, a removal is coming, if you will, right? That's 555 in the Greek and Hebrew Strongs, right? So we seen this in Night of the Comet also, and anytime you see these things show up, they're going to specifically apply. That's why Hollywood, obviously, 555 got a lot to do with stripping off something, right? Like a veil, perhaps, if you will. But continuing on. Now, 458 is the next number that will pop up in the scenes in this movie. It says lawlessness, right? Lawlessness. This is part of the reason that God will come. He said the falling away must happen first, and that the lawless one must be revealed first. So unless the Bible is not true, and that we're not supposed to discern any lawless one, if you will, then why would God give us the capacity to do so? And why will we be able to observe that and keep it to ourselves? It don't make sense. If the falling away is happening, the apostasy, right? If all of these things that the Bible say don't believe the Lord is coming unless these things come to pass, if you see it coming to pass, just it is what it is, right? You do not have information at the palm of your hands just to continue to be oblivious. That was only for a short period of time. Eventually, knowing is the key, right? Continuing on. Now, I don't know if Father is pointing out what this lawlessness is really coming from, but he's also telling you that he wants to reassert. 458 means lawlessness, but it also means God is king, right? So God in some way is going to reassert himself that he is king over the universe, the existence of all. Remember I showed y'all, man, y'all go back and watch the videos, man. It just keep lining up like a haircut. You know what I'm saying? It's really that deep. I showed you the God of the universe through titles, right? Was that Ben-Hadad? That had all the Lord of Lords, King of Kings, and so on and so forth. He had all these titles, if you will. One of them was being King of the universe. I guess he was that hard. But continuing on. And then you got Barnabas showing up here too, so it's really connecting the dots. February 10th, 2007. Come on, y'all. The dots is so specific. I ain't doing this on purpose even. I'm just doing what it do. But continuing on. The next number that shows up in the movie is 914. What does 914 express to us? Everything that we done seen before. We saw that in 23, my father wants to gather or gatherer, right? So we know that 914 is specifying that even further because it says to set apart. Now, what is he setting apart? Because we know to set apart means to make holy. So when somebody try to say, oh, you think you holier than now, or you think you too good, it's never because you holy like you just like, nah, you're not floating or nothing like that to be holy. To be holy, it just means you're set apart, right? So to be set apart is a good thing. Now, 914, why? Because of lawlessness, right? So that God can show that he is king. See, if as long as that the wheats is mixed with the weeds, God's full judgment will not come on this world, right? So there has to be a setting apart, right? The weeds from the wheats. There must be a harvest, if you will, right? Continuing on. So 914 also means Barachias, right? Which is also another form for Barak, or also to bless, right? We spoke of these meanings already before. So you have Barachias right here, meaning to bless, right? And we continuing on. I'm just saying. Hey, if you think 47 ain't just as all get out as anybody else who ever sat in the hot seat, hey, it is what it is. Boy, go watch anybody that ever lied to you and you went on ahead and went into the ballot. That's why you have information. But continuing on, y'all. Yeah, entertainment purposes. So the next number is 307. Now, I put a star on 307 because 307 pops up with a double portioning. So to me, I feel like God is trying to specify what he means here in 307 because it was shown in the movie more than once. So it means to bring up, to raise up, to lead. I guess where? Where are we getting raised up and led to? Brought up to? 307 also means a fortress, right? Now, I showed you this fortress before when I told you about my dreams in Montana and Chester, because Chester itself means a fortress, if you will, right? Now, this fortress, to me, I'm going to say it represents God's kingdom in some way, shape, form, and or fashion. And we know that the gates won't be ever closed during this time and this reign, because during this reign, I believe that all of the evil and all of the bad and all of the things that'll be outside the kingdom of heaven, it's going to be a reason for that. And trust me, and anybody with ill will or ill intent, every time they get close to the kingdom, I'm telling you, it's going to be like that one story that I showed y'all about the Met Gala, about the flower in the garden, if you will, and how the people kept trying to get to the garden, but every time he plucked a flower, they would reverse all the way back to a day or two camped out before they could get to the garden to pick a flower, right? And that as long as he plucked a flower, every time they got close, that army would never be able to touch the garden. That's a story I told y'all in one of my old past videos about the Met Gala, because it was a theme there, right? Sleeping Beauty and so on and so forth. I'm telling y'all, they've been telling y'all the truth right in your face with all the syrup and pancake batter mixture you can put on it. You hear me? Candles and cake and all. You know? See, it ain't my job to pay attention to every detail. What my job is to pay attention to is the narrative of right here and right now in the present, right? Because God is past, present, and future. That's why I can go line these movies up with all these other movies and they all go together, and that the dates and the names probably more than likely is going to be there in some way. Or the necessity of the storyline is always going to be there in some way, shape, form, or fashion. But continuing on, right? So we have 307 to bring up, to lead up, to raise up. Where we going and being led to? A fortress of some kind. All right, continuing on. Revelations, maybe, right? 21, I think that is. Probably 22. It's only 22 books in Revelation, if I'm not mistaken. Just like in the book number 23 in the movie. It's only 22 chapters, and I think after he found the 23rd chapter, it was like written on the walls or something like that, right? But continuing on. Double portion though, so he's making sure he wants to know that this message to bring up, to lead, to raise. We'll take that for whatever it's worth. But I'm pretty sure there's plenty of scriptures in Isaiah and other chapters where he says, raise up those in the prisons and those who are in the dark, right? It is time to come out of the darkness into the marvelous light, and so on and so forth. So I can really go in depth there, but that's pretty much what he's trying to let us know, that it's a time for us to go ahead and come into the light of things, the light of day, if you will. 318, the next number, it means necessity. This is a necessity to understand truth, to maybe you might not get superposition in how God came into being for our sake of existence, and not the fact that he wasn't already. It was for the fact that, man, are y'all going to exist outside of my thoughts practically, or y'all just going to stay within my imagination? I done already lived all y'all's flaws and all. I done lived down everything you snuck and did and that you did in the light of day. You know, once God got done being every pebble, rock, and flower, I suppose, he decided that, you know, and who knows how many times God has done this. We're not going to get into that because we could go forever about forever, right? So we're going to stick to the script because we're trying to measure and observe how God is speaking, right? If God is God, he do want a line of communication and outside of just your imagination. But continuing on. So 318 means this is a necessity. Why? Because of distress. Because it also means distress, right? And it also means another is following. So I'm pretty sure that the Bible was pretty clear on a first beast and a second beast of Revelations, right? Another following, if you will. So when we think about all of these aspects of Christ coming, we always know that even when the lawless one is revealed and all of these different things come into the light of day, that there's always another following. Just like the Bible speaks of a queen of the south shall be raised up in this time to judge, right? We just saw to raise up. Now, could I be bending these to my own accord and will, perhaps, or not? But the numbers are present in the movie, right? So continuing on. It says, the next number, it says one who does good, right? Finally, right? 17 means finally, one who does good. Now, we know that Widow Dopkins, right? The lady that had the polka dots on, right? She was in association because all of these are divine feminine aspects of the Lord, but through Walter, if you will. But continuing on, because she's really kind of like Laura also. But, you know, they try to cover it up in these different allegories and metaphors within the number 23, the book that he wrote, right? But Miss Widow Dopkins, right? She's a widow, which means her husband has perished in some way. But her last name entails that she has a child because it means the son of good, right? So right there in Widow Dopkins, you have the son of good, right? But continuing on. So we have that association right here with the number 17. Finally, one who does good. 977 is the next number. It says the elect. Because we know that the elect are those who Father seeks to gather, right? And not only them, we know that this is in association with the grafting in, etc., etc., etc. The whole fact of the matter that Christ went on that cross in a universal speaking manner anyway. But continuing on. So the elect, you got to remember, the one who is coming and that is another following is probably one that seeks to eat and devour, because 977 also means to eat and or devour. Now we got to be careful to not go back into sleep or darkness or go back into this slumberous state of being. We know that the 2 groups and 10 virgins they both did that, whether wise and or foolish. They both went back into a slumberous state. But here, I'm pretty sure God is telling you to be diligent, right? to be brave and courageous at this time, to gather your courage and your strength, right? 555, right? Because a stripping off, a removal is happening, right? A gathering is taking place, if you will, right? But continuing on. This is from the movie number 27. The number 906 means to throw, to cast, to put to place. It also means a branch and or a pole. Now we know that the branch is symbolic of the children of Christ, and or a specific child of Christ, and or of Christ himself. I believe they are all three. It says there are many branches, but remember, Christ is the root. So I don't look at Christ himself as the branch. I look at Christ as the root. He is the reason that there is a branch that grows up out of it in the first place, right? So I look at Christ as the root. But we have right here to cast, to put to place, to cast, to throw, branch, pole. Now, when we really think about this branch and or pole, it brings me back to the story in Zechariah I showed y'all, where the angel Michael and Satan were standing before the throne of God, and so was Joshua. But I look at it like when they say Joshua in this sense, I'm thinking of Jesus, even though I know they're talking about Joshua in the time of the Exodus. But see, my mind knows how to multi-function in multi-dimensions when the Bible is trying to revelate something here. So in this particular part of the Bible, Joshua had on tattered clothes, raggedy clothes. Satan was standing there to accuse him, right? He was like, ain't this the branch that was thrown into the fire, right? Ain't this the branch that was thrown into the fire? That's pretty unique, because the branch that was thrown into the fire was pulled out of the fire. So when you pull a branch out of the fire, it become a torch, right? It become a tool, a useful tool to gather and provide light and a path in darkness, right? A branch, a lit branch now.
Israel was supposed to be a holy nation and a kingdom of priests. Those two phrases mean basically the same thing. A nation was like a kingdom, and priests were the holy men of Israel. Or at least, they were supposed to be. The priests had a special job, which meant they could handle special things, wear special clothes, and go into special places. They were supposed to be the ones who offered sacrifices for the people, so their sins could be forgiven. And they did do a lot of that. The problem was, the priests were sinful too. The priests were holy men who were often not very holy. During the days of Zechariah the prophet, there was a high priest named Joshua who stood before the angel of the Lord in dirty clothes. Joshua's garments looked like he'd been splattered with mud, or even grosser, a dirty diaper. He looked filthy because he had been filthy. Joshua was a sinner who had disobeyed the Lord and had no right to stand before God, let alone make atonement for the people. Standing next to Joshua was Satan, the nasty one we met as a snake in the garden. Satan loves to do two things: lie and accuse. He deceives people so they believe what is false, and he accuses people of wrongdoing. Sometimes his accusations are lies, but sometimes they are true. In this case, Satan was right. Joshua was a dirty high priest. But God wasn't going to let Satan get the last word in Joshua's life. "The Lord rebuke you," an angel told Satan. "This man is a stick snatched from the fire." The Lord rescued Joshua from the fiery judgment he deserved. And God gave him new clothes. The angel said, "Take away these filthy garments. Give him a clean robe, a clean sash, and a clean hat." So the helpers around Joshua gave him a new outfit from head to toe. Satan had no reason to accuse him anymore. Then the angel had a message for Joshua. The Lord has made you clean, all on his own. These new clothes aren't yours, but God has given them to you. Now he wants you to live like you look. No more dirty ways, no more disobedience. It's time to do things God's way. But the angel wasn't quite finished. He had one more thing to say, and it was a very good thing. Listen up, Joshua, and all your friends. A better priest is coming. He will be the branch, the promised one from David's family tree. And when he comes, the Lord will forgive all your sins, and everyone will be invited to his kingdom feast. It was quite a promise. We might even think it was too good to be true, except that we know a little more of the story than Zechariah or Joshua did. The one they were waiting for was the one we know as Jesus.
Second Enoch chapter 22. In the 10th heaven, the archangel Michael brought Enoch in front of the face of the Lord. And on the 10th heaven, Aravoth, I saw the view of the face of the Lord, like iron made burning hot in a fire, and brought out, and it emits sparks, and is incandescent. Thus even I saw the face of the Lord. But the face of the Lord is not to be talked about. It is so very marvelous and supremely awesome and supremely frightening. And who am I to give an account of the incomprehensible being of the Lord, and of his face, so extremely strange and indescribable? And how many are his commands, and his multiple voice, and the Lord's throne supremely great and not made by hands, and the choir stalls all around him, the cherubim and the seraphim armies, and their never silent singing. Who can give an account of his beautiful appearance, never changing and indescribable, and his great glory? And I fell down flat and did obeisance to the Lord. And the Lord, with his own mouth, said to me, Be brave, Enoch. Don't be frightened. Stand up and stand in front of my face forever. And Michael, the Lord's greatest archangel, lifted me up and brought me in front of the face of the Lord. And the Lord sounded out his servants. The Lord said, Let Enoch come up and stand in front of my face forever. And the glorious ones did obeisance and said, Let him come up. The Lord said to Michael, Take Enoch and extract him from the earthly clothing, and anoint him with a delightful oil, and put him into the clothes of glory. And Michael extracted me from my clothes. He anointed me with a delightful oil, and the appearance of that oil is greater than the greatest light. Its ointment is like sweet dew, and its fragrance like myrrh, and its shining is like the sun. And I gazed at all of myself, and I had become like one of the glorious ones.
So obviously, Joshua was a torch of some kind, symbolically speaking, and he was pulled out of the fire so that he could become clean and made whole. So while he was sitting there being accused, right, by Satan, not Michael, and then the interesting thing in this particular part, Satan was standing at the right hand of the throne, and they made sure to make mention of it. I just find that at that particular moment, or whatever was going on in this scene, they just wanted you to know he was sitting at the right, or standing at the right of the throne. And I know that that's a particular position that belongs to Joshua himself. Now, Joshua is graduating, though, obviously. He's taking off his dusty clothes and he's putting on his fine clothes. We've been talking about garments and stuff like this. I made an analogy of it through Greatest American Hero, you know. And he lost his manual, don't even know how to use his suit. He had to learn how to use it with just pure instincts, I want to say. And then it was genetically formatted to him so that nobody else could wear it. If you think they making this type of stuff up, I can get why y'all just is enjoying the finer things in life, I guess. But continuing on, right? So, the elect, right? To eat, to devour, right? To throw, to cast, to put to place. What? The branch or the pole? See, this is symbolic of going into the darkness to gather those who are in the darkness, who are in hell, right? Who are in Hades, or who are in the abyss, if you will. Going into superposition, right? To bring those who had to die, right? Because they stuck, y'all, we stuck in some type of loop. Now, we might not want to admit that, and it might be scary to think about, and we don't know what's beyond this life after death, and yada, yada, yada. Like, these people just didn't find it so important to write stuff on stones in blood. All these eons and generations, as long as man been on this little bitty pebble, you sitting here to me and tell me they found death so important to write about it in so many ways, shape, forms, and fashions, and eternal life? And you don't think neither one of those have something in common? What do you go to church for? I'm going to ask you that. If you seek an eternal life, because that's what God is offering you. That's what Christ is offering you. And if that ain't what you really want, then think about that deeply, somewhere in your heart. I'm just saying. Lord help my soul. But continuing on, right? Because we got a few more numbers left and we almost done here, right? So, because you got to remember, we got to cast all these things into the lake of fire. All of those who serve the false prophet and the devil and so on and so forth. All the angels that was with them, so on and so forth. With them, so on and so forth, right? I think I understand why those things have to be cast into the lake of fire, but I swear if I tell y'all that part of the story right now, it'll be for entertainment purposes only. But it'd probably be over some of y'all's head. But we have to do a show on about these garments. Because if these garments represent the angels in any way, shape, form, or fashion, we have to understand about the ones who rebelled then. And what that means and how they could be and or operating in the world of today. Because I think there are some misconceptions in when we think about certain stuff and how this actually goes. And I think that some of these rebelled states of beings have something to do with a lot of stuff that got to do with a lot of misconstrued understanding. But continuing on. So the next number is, right? Oh, Zechariah though. So we have Zechariah being accused and being the branch pulled out of the fire. I wanted to speak on that because it just spoke of to cast, to put to place, the branch of the pole. It says to elect, to eat, to devour, right? So these things are all happening in sequence in a row. See, they elected to be eaten and or devoured first, which means that sounds like going into the state pit of hell or going into some sense of superposition, right? Right? And then it says to throw, to cast, to put to place. So you got to go in to get out, seemingly, right? Because now you done went in, you was elected, you done went in. Now you was supposed to be thrown, to be cast, to be put to place, a branch and or a pole. And I just expressed to you out of the book of Zechariah how Joshua was the branch that was in the fire, that was drawn out of the fire, right? Being a torch, giving clean garments and a turban or a crown, if you will. But continuing on, y'all, this is what it is all about. Now, the next number is 698. It says to pledge. 698 means to pledge. Before I was interrupted, it means to pledge, and it also means the Athenian Council. So we know the Athenian Council is associated back to the Hill of Mars, where all the great minds who used to gather together and speak on Mars Hill, including Paul, and they would go up to Mars Hill and philosophize about Christ to the Greeks, I guess, if you will, right? So you have this Athenian council, and then you also have this pledge, because I'm pretty sure anybody who knows that word probably knows something about Greek mythology and its association to Christ in any way, shape, form, or fashion. And if they don't, then we're just going to continue on with the narrative.
You know Sean Combs?
Puff Daddy?
Yeah.
P. Diddy, whatever you call himself these days. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, he's part of what's called the Boule. The Boule is a branch of the Illuminati.
Okay.
It's the black people.
But what exactly is the Boule? Well, in short, the Boule is a primarily black fraternity in the United States that is comprised of elites who have greatly excelled in their professions. One cannot ask to be a part of the Boule. No, no, no. They recruit who they want to join. Think W.E.B. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, Martin Luther King Jr., Andrew Jackson, and nowadays it is thought Oprah, Jay-Z, Beyonce, all of these celebrities are also a part of the Boule. These are very highly respected people. They are the Black Americans that are supposed to influence and represent the majority of Black Americans, the ones that make the decisions, the top 10%. The top 10% that is supposed to speak for the remaining 90%. The Sigma Pi Phi fraternity, also known as the Boule, began in the U.S. in 1904. Now take a look at these portraits. Does anything pop out to you? I know that this is a black and white, but do you notice how these gentlemen are all fair-skinned? Also, most of them have MD behind their name, meaning most of them are doctors, all but one. This is no coincidence. This is a product of the slave masters taking the black women and impregnating them to go on to have biracial children. Now, the thing for many mixed race persons back in the day was whether or not you could pass as white. Let's not forget the paper bag test. But those who could pass had a better chance of getting into prestigious schools. I will say that they did have to do the work, and they did have to study hard while they were in these schools to become doctors, but the opportunity was there for them. So this birthed the class of fair-skinned black professionals that were able to make good money and form social circles. With origins in ancient Greece, this Sigma Pi Phi fraternity was started by Henry McKee Minton. Minton was born on December 25th, 1870 in Columbia, South Carolina. In school, he excelled as an athlete, debater, as well as an editor. Minton enrolled in the Philadelphia College of Pharmacy and graduated with a degree in 1895. He operated the first black-owned drugstore in Philadelphia until 1902 when he enrolled in the Jefferson Medical College.
Henry and his friends recognized the call of W.E.B. Du Bois in 1903 for a talented tenth of African Americans to work for the benefit of all. And Minton imagines, as he studies to become one of the fewer than 20 African American doctors in the entire city. Henry seeds the idea in conversations with friends. He calls them together at his home to organize the fraternity on May 15th, 1904.
Now, who are these men? Basically, there was nothing that was published about this organization in those early years. It was a secret organization. And it was only known by those individuals who were part of it.
Men, or archons as they're called in Sigma Pi Phi, carefully grew.
It was and still is the preeminent organization of African American men. It is the only graduate fraternity in the world. It is a fraternity in which men are invited into membership. And it contains, I would say, the most illustrious African-American men in the world. Let's think for a second about who were some of the members of this fraternity. Well, of course, there was Martin Luther King, Jr., there was W.E.B. Du Bois, there was Charles R. Drew, there was Percy L. Julian, there was Ralph J. Bunch, there was John Hope Franklin, there was William H. Hastie, there was Vernon E. Jordan. The list goes on.
Nominations for new members are made by existing members, and candidates must undergo a thorough vetting process that includes background checks, interviews, and reference checks. Once a candidate is approved for membership, they must take part in a formal initiation ceremony that involves various rituals and traditions. The Boulets started publishing a journal in 1912 to communicate with its growing membership, now beginning to spread throughout the U.S. The Rose Library online has cataloged many of the publishings and made them public if you are interested in looking further into this. The Boulay Society persists until today. They make donations and do good things. However, allegations of elitism and exclusion have been a persistent issue for the Boulay Society. Some have accused the organization of perpetuating the very same systems of privilege and discrimination that it claims to fight against. Critics argue that the Boulay Society reinforces a hierarchical and elitist system that privileges the interests of a select group of Black professionals over the broader Black community. So what do you guys think of the Boulay? Do you think these are now the gatekeepers and the representatives that they have put in place? Not my cup of tea.
Now, pledge does not have to have anything to do with things of that nature. I'm sure that we can find scripture on pledge and the Athenian Council, because to me, it kind of sound like it sound. You know, I'm pretty sure a lot of different societies and groups were derived from people like the Athenian Council and so on and so forth. So I'm pretty sure that whoever God is indignant with, boy, they know how to be real disruptive. Put my phone on Do Not Disturb now, because now it's becoming a thing. Anyway, most of these people, 6, 9, 8, if you will, a lot of these societies and or groups that JFK was revealing, right, that he said that was a secrecy that was repugnant, so on and so forth, they probably pledged to groups like what the Athenian Council and some of these societies derive from, because they would know some of the knowledge and secrets of the universe, metaphorically put into personifications and terms that are actually real in that way, but at the same time, they know that if they keep it a lot more plain, people probably understand a lot better what's going on here when we personify these things, if you will. Excuse me. Now, the next number is 1814, or 1814, right? Which means burning and chaste. It means to leap out, to spring forth. So here we go, reiterating that whole Zechariah and Joshua standing before Michael and Satan. It may have been Gabriel, but I'm going to say it was probably Michael and or Gabriel. But he's standing before them as they branch pulled out of the fire, if you will, right? And they sitting there, you know, accusing, like, ain't this the branch that you threw into the fire and woo-woo-woo-woo, right? But yes, he's the branch that was pulled out of the fire. And now that branch is being given a high place and authority right there before God's throne, right? In the book of Zechariah. So 814 or 1814, I mean, reiterates burning, chaste, right? To leap out, to spring forth. Out of where? Out of the fire. Christ coming as the phoenix, if you will, reborn, the resurrection, right? The rebirth, the recycle, if you will, right? Continuing on. The next number is 2153, which means piously and devout. Now we know that a lot of these females, a lot of times, always represent these type of characteristics, if you will, just like Agatha meant virtuous and honorable, and things of that nature. We know that Almathea, how she guarded and protected Zeus, right? We know that Diana of Ephesus and Artemis, and how all of these deities, and Juno even though they goddesses of fertility somehow, they are also a lot of times virgin goddesses, if you will. Lord G, continuing on. And just remember, these characters are in the Bible, just in case people just don't want to wrap their mind around that. Anyway, so yes, piously and devout. It also means 2153 means it means to sprinkle, right? So when we think about sprinkling, we think about being the salt of the land. We think about being God's salt, right? We think about learning and understanding, and how we're supposed to eat spiritual food, right? And we're supposed to take these things into learning and understanding. So that is something that we're supposed to spread about ourselves. Iron sharpen iron, if you will, right? Each one teach one, as they say, right? The next number is 502, meaning teach, learn, right? It also means drawing of water. Now, when I think about Walter being in Aquarius, and how this movie is February 10th and a triune type of factor, being it ended on that day in the movie, 2007 speakingly. In the movie though, wise. Also the Tombstone and Lord Tollins. There's so many connections there that, maybe I'm doing too much, but I didn't even try to go watch that movie for those type of purposes, but yet those anomalies would be present there. And to me, that's just that little bit of curiosity in me that says that if I believe in something like God, I would think that he's capable of just throwing anything anywhere, and it's gonna be there if I'm trying to express something that makes any detail of sense. I know I got the gift for the gab, so I might talk way beyond what's necessary, but y'all just bear with me and we're gonna continue on. So 502 means teach, learn, drawing of water. So Aquarius being the water bearer, right? I think that whole symbolism represents pouring out God's spirit in that time. And then he says, wait in the upper room until I pour out upon you power from among high. So, I've been talking about Aurora Borealis. I done showed you all these different metaphors popping up in TV shows and movies and so on and so forth, and how it's changing people into something more than what they know that they are. And they're coming into the knowledge and the sense of that. And I believe that if you ever wanted to have gifts or superpowers, I would believe your mind would be your first power. That's why Professor X on X-Men is like the most powerful of all the mutants, because he has power of the mind. And I think your mind is what unlocks everything else within. Not only that, I believe Jean Grey was another metaphor for that, because she didn't have control when coming into these understandings and or knowings. When she was hit with her powers, Professor X took a long time to get to where he was at. She, on the other hand, didn't really have much control over that power unless she went in full chaos mode. But continuing on. So the drawing of water, right? We are expressed as water, So all of these different metaphors are really breakdownable into the fact of the matter that we need to learn, we need to be taught, we need to understand these things, and the Bible says these things. And it says that in these times that the water or the knowledge will be like water, right? The knowledge of God will be abundant in the land, right? So we have to understand that this is that time. You've never had access outside of a library or a college or a seminary or some monastery or somewhere that have a lot of books and didn't have to spend all day and night there. This is the first time for leisure, for fun, for educational factors of the matter, whatever reasons being, you have the capacity in this generation to do those type of things. And it's not by coincidence, I continue to say that, for entertainment purposes though. Now, the next number is 35, which means longing and desire. It also means without genealogy. See, until we really acknowledge that God is, by whatever measurable means that we have, speakingly in this world, he does have a longing and a desire to be with us. His identity it has no identity until we acknowledge it. And not in the sense that we gonna just get to ignore God forever, because this is a time clock type of thing. This is a timer set type of thing. So, once the timer and the clock is set, if you will, once that clock strike 12, doomsday clock, if you will, right? Once that clock strike 12, things do have to happen in order to bring you into the fullness of who you are, because Christ already died for the fact that people was going to die eternally blind. So the fact that he knew your eternal state when you left this world, he knew the consequences of coming out of superposition. So he had to come die for the fact that y'all even came out of y'all's protective state of just being within God's system, of really his mind, practically. I mean, you did exist there. You were a being. You did have a life. You did have a family. You did grow, learn, have knowledge, and you did go to school, and you did scrape your knee, and you did all of those things, except that it would have never been a physical experience. It would have been only an experience in God's mind, so to speak. And that's just for you to even grasp that at all. All right? Now, continuing on. So God does have a longing and a desire, and until we come back into superposition with our down payment and the rest of what goes with that, those white garments that you need to buy with purified gold spoke of in Revelation chapter 3, you need to understand that we are broke, that we not what we think we are without God. And until we come into understanding of that, nothing we do is clean. Our money ain't clean. Our lifestyles ain't clean. Yeah, God love us, and for who we are, he done already lived everybody's life that ever lived. So he already understand what we gonna do in this life, but it's the absent-mindedness of God that really tear people up. Romans chapter 1. I can go to Romans chapter 1 every time, let alone 2 Thessalonians. But I can go to Romans chapter 1 and Thessalonians to show you the type of people in this world today that say they love God, right, with their mouth. And that's just real. People do love God. Even in their ignorance, they probably do love God. Even when they know they messing up, they probably do love God. But they not trying to understand and know God. And because of that nobility, that royalty, that descendancy, and that bloodline, everything that ever happened for God to establish in this world, you're going to get the opposite until you recognize the truth. Now, the opposite can only last for so long. The cup eventually going to rise up to heaven, God said. And when that cup of sins rose up to heaven and or rises up to heaven, that's your timer. That's your hourglass. Once Mystery Babylon and all her obscenities, right? All her fornications, once all of that done reached up to enough is enough, which I'm sure we're going through the process right now, whether we know that or not. But we are going through a changing of the tides. Now, do you need to get overwhelmed and frustrated and stressed out? No, because, the Bible says this is good news. I already told you in Jeremiah 29:11 that God has a hope for your future through the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, practically, to keep the long story short. So, continuing on. The next number is 1931. We already broke that down because we broke down the June 9th, 1931, how that represents Juno. We broke down the number 9. We broke down 1931, meaning the same, right? And set to go down. Boom. Continuing on. So see how these numbers continue to reiterate certain things? Because I told you that the long story short is that God will go to hell about his wife. On some Summer Walker, go to hell or jail about you type business. You hear me? I think all of these songs is really speaking to that. I know they might soften it up and make it real worldly, But I promise you, I hear more than worldliness in all of these songs. No lie. Continuing on. That's the art form of them telling you something about superposition. And, you know, if one of us goes in and we all go through it. He was telling her, don't do it. Please don't do it. Because if she decided that she wanted to give life to all of this, we were always going to live and die. I don't know how selfish that was and or not, you know, but at least we all got to come down here and live. Or come here in this small pebble of existence and do any of this shit. But continuing on. Now, it seems like the next number is going to be 6106. I believe this number right here was found on the back of the page or something when his son was reading the book. But 6106 means essence, and it also means bone. Now, see, to me, that's telling me, like, flesh of my flesh, blood of my blood, spirit and flesh, right? You know, like, it's really speaking to Christ, because he told you to eat the bread and the wine in remembrance of me, to represent those things, right? Now, this essence and bone, it brings me back full circle to the homunculus character, or the homunculus Christ creature, because they use things like this to make these creatures out of so-called magic. And we go back to Gargamel and the Smurfs, and remember I showed you the Phrygian hat of Mithras, and these are mythical cults of the Romans back in the day, right? But all of them talking about Christ, even if they didn't know it, even if these zeitgeisters didn't know they was talking about Christ through Adonis and Attis and all these different characters, y'all gonna understand one day in some shape, form, or fashion about this superposition and quantum physics and how it applies to the existence of even us, if you will, right? But continuing on. So it means essence and bone. And remember, that's what Gargamel practically needed to make the Smurfs. He needed some. And when you're talking about homunculuses, they need things of this nature to create these surrogated children that are artificially inseminated or created, and or if you will, right? But continuing on. 85 means to be distressed, right? And it also means father of many nations, Abraham, right? Now, that's because in a time of distress, God is going to answer. In a time of distress, God's plan, if you will, again, right? God's plan is going to come into being, you know. I'm in love with two girls in what time, and they teens. Y'all really need to start paying attention, right? 2 times 5 plus 5. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, continuing on. Oh, just like 6 and 9. June 6-9, right? The 6-9 is another detail of Christ's birth, because Christ was born on 2B Shavat, which is in the month of February. Now, how does you know these associations? We can go back to the staff of Aaron. It bloomed in almond when the staff chose him, practically, right? Now, you can go to Joseph. Joseph, when he's in the picture with Mary and the baby Jesus, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that's an almond bud there also. Now, the almond blooms in a particular time of year. It begins to bloom in February. So, on the Jewish calendar, the almond is associated with the month of February. When you have the Ark of the Covenant, you have 2 tablets and 10 commandments, right? Symbolizing Christ's law and his birth and how he came to finish the law, right? And then you also have some manna and Aaron's staff, right? The almond bud, if you will, right? I told you about the story of Sybil and how she had the divine masculine, divine feminine attributes. Now think about a woman that's pregnant with a son or a child, period, man. Like, women just don't act normal when they about to go through 9 months in the trimester, if you will. Right? That's the only thing try about it. Like, because why do the cells skip 3 anyway? Why do it skip from 2 and go straight to 4? Nobody really just calculating. The universal math is right there in the cellular structure, if you asking me. You know? But continuing on. So we have in a time of distress, right? Many nations, right? Because Father Abraham, if you will, right? So in the time of the distress of many nations, that's when God's acts are going to be recognized and or made upon the world. Now, we had 7 women in this particular show. So we already know the signs of the moon and the moon goddesses, right? We already talked about that all the way through and through. Diana and so on and so forth of the Ephesians, if you will, right? We talked about Agatha and how she's associated with Aggie, right? And being Sparrow, representing God's eye, or one of God's eyes, if you will. We talked about Sirius Leary. We need to understand him because Sirius Leary, also that name shows up again in the movie with Jim Carrey, which is about him being in some bubble, if you will. Kind of like superposition yet again on the movie The Truman Show, right? So we have all of these different messagings here, and I believe that they do speak. Now, what are the names of the women? We had Agatha Sparrow, which we spoke of. We talked about Suicide Blonde already. We talked about Miss Widow Dopkins. We talked about Miss Laura Tollins, who is the main victim, if you will, of this whole movie. All the investigating is surrounding her life and or death and or her resurrection, so to speak, if you will, right? And then we also have Sybil. Now, Sybil was the lady that worked at the dog station, because we know Walter was a dog catcher, right? AKA the angel, if you will, right? Like Michael, I believe, since he's the leader of the armies, right, of heaven. But Sybil, if you pay attention, she has the headset on at the radio station. We already talked about Godhead and the radio head, and how Samantha on the night of the comment was showing how she was Lucifer and controlling the throne room in some way. They wanted to reiterate that here to you, because when one comes down, the other one goes up. So I think there's always some line of communication or something, no matter which one is exchanging places, if you will. There's always going to be that divine radio head, if you will, in exchange for whichever position either one is in, whether physically or immaterially speaking. But continuing on. So that pretty much sums up all the characters there. So we have Sybil. Now, she referred to Walter as a dog, talking about, is you going to wag your tail this way? And then she tried to kiss him under the mistletoe. That's to show you that Saturnalia kind of celebratory type of situation when we're talking about Christianity and all of those beliefs as a whole. Remember, Saturn being Chronos, or the devourer, if you will, right? As we seen in 977, to eat and or to devour. Who? The elect. The elect was his own children who were going to be gods themselves, or we'll say angels, or higher beings, if you will. Those who were next in line, the Olympians, they would be called one day. And, you know, he wanted to stop that from really happening in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Now, we don't know how to interpret that in the way, in the sense, as a good and or a bad thing, because are any of these things good and or bad? I think they're all symbolic and metaphorical. So I don't see it in that way, because I know that they all came out to become the Olympians and to have authority over this known world, if you will. But continuing on. So we have Fabrizia. Fabrizia, name meaning.
Fabrizia is a feminine Italian name.
All right.
It comes from the Latin fabritius, and it means craftswoman, artisan, or smith. The name is linked to skilled, creative, and industrious qualities.
Yeah. So we have the craftsman yet again. Remember, the carpenter influenced the goldsmith. I told y'all about that whole little music video with the girl with the welder's helmet on with the name Alex on top of it. But right here, it's showing us a craftsman in the Fabrizia, the smith, right? And why is that? Because if she was Eve, she kept taking all these men to the garden. Like, she wasn't doing it in the room. The only place she was and superposition, if you will, with was Jim Carrey. But anytime she was cheating, if you will, and playing this Eve character, she was always in the garden under the steps of heaven, if you will, which I think was to signify the Garden of Eden. That's why they incorporate this lady in red very specifically to this movie, because that also is important to paying attention to the Truman Show, right? They make sure the lady in red is there because it's the apple, if you will. It's the bite of the fruit, if you will, right? But continuing on. See, now it's in reverse. The lack of knowledge is why we perish now. See, it was the other way around in the beginning because of the simple fact God knew how all of this was going to play out, right? Coming from heaven and creating all of these things in the known universe was coming out of a state, right? And then coming into the universe in itself was coming into a state. So you're collapsing all of these different states of being just for the physical state of being to be manifest. So even in the physical manifestation, you're going to have superposition in the garden. You're going to have a 0 and a 1 there, right? That came from the 0. The 1 is going to derive. And within superposition, they good. But 1 is going to seem to go against superposition, and they're going to do something that knocks both of them out of superposition, right? And now they have to go into this world, which is another sense of superposition, but we don't know because we ain't observing and or measuring none of these things really at all. We done got way beyond lost, I believe, which is a part of somebody's scam, but at the same time, it's part of God's plan for us to be born here in this world. So we're about to go into that collapsed state again, I believe, and it's for better or for worse most of the time, and that's totally on our free will to decide how we gonna ride. So when Eve ate the fruit first, I believe just like Almathea nurtured and nursed Zeus, I believe that she was nurtured and nursed by that serpent as well. If you see Athena, the goddess of wisdom, she's always accompanied by this serpent, right? And then sometimes she's also accompanied by this deer. And sometimes it's either or. I guess it depends on what story it is. And it might not be Athena that's with the deer. It might be Artemis that's always with the deer. But anyway, continuing on. I believe they are nurtured by these animals, and that these animals are really angels in some type of shape-shifting disguise, and that they're physical forms of what were emanations, or the spiritual beings of what God created, right? They didn't have a physical form, but God did create a physical form for them because they were meant to have a symbiotic relationship. And we look at them like garments and things of that nature, but I believe that the relationship is meant to bridge the flesh and the blood with the spiritual nature, and that our spirit, we already have a down payment or an inheritance within us, spoke up in Corinthians by Paul, but we meant to put those garments on so that what is the rest of us that is present with God, that we can't contain in this flesh and blood, we'll be able to contain it and harness it when we put on these garments. And not only that, we'll be able to go back into superposition with actual physical body, and then we'll be able to go do stuff that I guess you're going to have to go read the Bible and understand better what we're going to be able to do exactly, and what any of the Bible is actually telling you, because it's probably way beyond most people pay grade. I've been saying nobody knows what Solomon's temple really is because they probably don't. It's interesting in this generation how oblivious people gonna continue to be when the truth is so in your face. It ain't hard to conceive it once the lights come on. Once the lights come on, you're just gonna start seeing everything for what it is. You can call that an experience. I don't call it from by states of a vision or a dream. I don't know if you did coke or heroin. I'm gonna tell you personally, I don't do drugs. The only thing I do is medicinal marijuana. And I think as an adult, that's my prerogative, and it really ain't nobody's business. But at the same time, it is what it is. Now, continuing on. So, now that we covered all these characters in the number 23, we have one more character that I want to read, and I believe that's Alice Mortimer, because Alice Mortimer was the first therapist that Walter had to go see after getting bit by the dog. See, the biting of the dog was like kind of getting hit with the spirit, and that spirit being passed on to you. I showed y'all that in Superman 3 when the little white and black penguin symbolizing the angel was head was on fire, representing the spirit, right? And that when he picked the angel up and blew out the smoke off of his head, that the spirit was translated from the angel or the penguin to Clark Kent, making him now Superman. But we're talking about in a sense of the spirit. But continuing on. See, all of the other gifts come after y'all figure out what is real. Until y'all probably gonna push yourselves into this future, I'm pretty sure. Like, I don't know what all this keeping people calm, cool, collected is all about. I mean, free will is what it is, but for how long at this point, we can clearly see something going on. But continuing on, we finally made it over to the Truman Show, but I did want to break down Alice Mortimer. So we know that Alice practically is like Alice in Wonderland. The reason I say that is because I already showed y'all that Jim Carrey was like a dog rabbit with the symbolism of the cat, dog, and the rabbit and the bird on his patch. But in my perspective, I'm looking at him as, okay, the dog was before the cat, and then the rabbit was after the cat. So he's the dog and the rabbit between both of them, like the first and the last, if you will. But continuing on. Now, the rabbit actually had to be sacrificed in some way, shape, form, or fashion, because the rabbit in some way, shape, form, or fashion probably going to represent the sin, if you will. But continuing on. So we got Alice, like Alice in Wonderland. Why? Because Alice is the one that follows the rabbit. The rabbit is the keeper of time. The rabbit is the one that's the guy between worlds, back and forth, if you will, right? So that rabbit is always going to be present in some way, shape, and or fashion, because symbolically it is Christ, right? So we have Alice there, and I'm pretty sure she touched something on the desk like the rabbit, just to go ahead and put that extra icing on the cake. So we know Alice itself means noble, of a noble kind, right? And then we have her last name, Mortimer, name meaning. Okay.
Mortimer comes from Old French and Latin.
It means the Dead Sea, still water, right? And it means dead pond, or stagnant pond. So when we think of the Dead Sea, I'm pretty sure there's a Bible verse where it said the Dead Sea will be brought back to life with fresh water. Now, I'm pretty sure they're keeping eyes on that, waiting on that day to happen. Not only that, the Dead Sea also represents Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, I believe that the Bible says that Mystery Babylon, or Babylon, if you will, herself, that her deeds were worse than her sisters, because the Bible refers to all these different nations as women, if you will, because God looks at this earth in that manner. So all these nations are looked at as women. And so he's speaking in this particular part of the Bible that Babylon, you making your sisters, even Sodom, not look as bad as you. You know what I'm saying? Now, we knew that it took at least 10 people that were righteous within that city, that the angels couldn't even find 10 people within the city. Only Lot and his family could get saved out of that situation, right? So when you think of it, it's like what we're about to experience in this time, right? I believe that we should be aware of just how we really operating. I'm not talking about, within your own personal vessel, which that is important. How is your personal vessel reflecting to your peers and your actions and your transaction? Now, I'm not a firm believer at this particular rate in this time, because what I do believe is that there's a time for everything. So I'm not a firm believer in turning the other cheek right now. I'm a believer in speaking peace unto somebody. I'm a believer in speaking knowledge unto somebody. I'm a believer in showing love to somebody. I'm a believer in compassion. And I'm a believer that love thy neighbor as thyself, and love God with all thy heart, might, and thy strength. And I believe that out of those 2 of the 10 commandments, 2:10 of those commandments, that if you just follow those 2, that literally, like he said, the rest of the law hangs on that. on those 2 commandments alone. So love God, love your neighbor like you love yourself, if you love yourself. And if your neighbor don't love you back, have some sense about not dealing with your neighbor then. Or dealing with your neighbor in a cordial manner from a distance, so be it. And when people deliberately show you disdainfulness about who you are, or that they don't like who you are, but somehow they try to act like they fake in your life, hey, them people can kick rocks too. You know, this is the time where God is gathering his chosen people. And you ain't have to be there your whole life. Because even in the 11th hour, if you didn't have no work, it's people that got work in the last minute. You understand that? And them 2 people that was standing outside the garden, while the rest of them people was inside the garden working, I could show you things about 2:10 that you're going to wonder why it's there. But, you know, I ain't finna get too hard into it. I wrote a book about 2:10 and how it's a revelation of some kind, universally speaking. But I guess I don't need any support for people to know that knowledge. I think that the knowledge is free, and God wanted it to be that way. But continuing on. So we got Miss Alice Mortimer, if you will, right? The Dead Sea, right? So God is coming to not only heal the Dead Sea, but he's coming to deal with the Dead Sea in a sense like he dealt with Sodom and Gomorrah, if you will. Right? It's just, that's the only way people gonna feel like they got any ability to do anything about anything except for standing idly by and or voting and or paying their taxes. Like, they just not gonna get the bigger picture. They might be too further along in life right now to care about the bigger picture, or think that just do what they can, you know, and that's preparation of some kind, or having enough food, or whatever you think it may be. Because any emergency could happen at any time. Look at what's been happening in the Carolinas and all over the United States and different places around the world even. Just in the past some odd years since 2020, if you will. We could say a lot about the past 6 years, man. So, that's not even going back to 11 years when I started this journey. So, speakingly, we need to recognize those things.
So 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 1. I'm only going to read to verse 10. For we know that when this earthly tent we live in is taken down, that is, when we die and leave this earthly body, we will have a house in heaven, an eternal body made for us by God himself and not by human hands. We grow weary in our present bodies, and we long to put on our heavenly bodies like new clothing. For we will put on heavenly bodies, we will not be spirits without bodies. While we live in these earthly bodies, we groan and sigh, but it's not that we want to die and get rid of these bodies that clothe us. Rather, we want to put on our new bodies so that these dying bodies will be swallowed up by life. God himself has prepared us for this, and as a guarantee, he has given us his Holy Spirit. So we are always confident, even though we know that as long as we live in these bodies, we are not at home with the Lord. For we live by believing and not by seeing. Yes, we are fully confident, and we would rather be away from these earthly bodies, for then we will be at home with the Lord. So whether we are here in this body or away from this body, our goal is to please him. For we must all stand before Christ to be judged. We will each receive whatever we deserve for the good or evil we have done in this earthly body.
For we know that when this earthly tent we live in is taken down, that is, when we die and leave this earthly body, we will have a house in heaven, an eternal body made for us by God himself, and not by human hands. We grow weary in our present bodies, and we long to put on our heavenly bodies like new clothing. For we will put on heavenly bodies. We will not be spirits without bodies. While we live in these earthly bodies, we groan and sigh, but it's not that we want to die and get rid of these bodies that clothe us. Rather, we want to put on our new bodies, so that these dying bodies will be swallowed up by life. God himself has prepared us for this, and as a guarantee, he has given us his Holy Spirit. So we are always confident, even though we know that as long as we live in these bodies, we are not at home with the Lord. For we live by believing, and not by seeing. Yes, we are fully confident, and we would rather be away from these earthly bodies, for then we will be at home with the Lord. So, whether we are here in this body, or away from this body, our goal is to please him. For we must all stand before Christ to be judged. We will each receive whatever we deserve for the good or evil we have done in this earthly body.
Silêncio que canta um sutil esplendor, luz na